This will invariably go over 10 minutes, so if you want to time it and then just cut me off either when it gets just to a point where you don't want to hear anymore, or it's past the point of the return. I wrote this specifically for this. It's called "What Do You Mean I Can't?" Tell me there's anything better in the world than possession. Look at all that I had and demean or denigrate that objectively in some way, please. I'm begging you. I wore 4 wardrobes a day, each of them layered on top of the other, unfurled and blossoming out from underneath the top layer like petals of some great sartorial bouquet. A midnight blue suit on top, a peach sports coat beneath that, with double-breasted collars, a thinner lime green London fog jacket beneath that, arranged just so it emerges colorifically, and lastly, a pressed you need a microscope to find a wrinkled linen black Oxford made out of endangered organic materials, giving the shirt I found a must-see while it lasts sort of appeal. I sound wealthy, but I wasn't. I simply knew the game of ownership. I knew how to obtain and slap down my name on that which I wanted, and convinced myself quite easily I needed. Wealth and class mattered not. What you could manage to acquire by however means necessary was what was integral to a good, healthy, fulfilling life in America. It was a matter of existence. To bolster that old Cartesian cogito, I put, and I want to stress that I wasn't alone in this decision, but I was probably one of the showiest ones out there, a modern understanding on it which stated impero ergo sum, which is to say I own, therefore I must exist. Thinking wasn't enough. Thinking was internal. Ownership, possession, itemization, decoration, all this was external, and so more or less what this all meant was that I added meaning, significance, and substance to my life by the fevered acquisition of things, and mostly people. Things, artifacts, objets d'art, weren't enough anymore. Money was, to be honest, useless to people like me. People who had taken a course of life in which possession of people for their own sake qua people who turned others into objects of ownership and made a kind of organic art form out of them. If I saw someone in the supermarket who I thought would behoove my collection, I would take them. It was that simple. And after enough of this, and after federal recognition of the nobility of this, the noblesse oblige of it, I had acquired a symphony behind me, a veritable score of people I could call my friends and family, but whom I owned. Belt buckles scraping along the pavement behind me maintained a steady martial rhythm as I maneuvered myself along the sidewalks, late already, heading for an all-weekend triannual The Art of Polypersonal Possession conference where we, state and federally certified collectors, relic seekers, possession hunters gathered, along with our numerous possessions, the vast majority of which must be my polypersonal possession dictates, organic and halfway alive. And we demoed our valuable possessions, gimgals, googracs, and baubles. The streets today were filled with gentlemen and gentlewomen exactly like me, though the numbers of their acquisitions barely cracked so much the fraction of mine. But there they sidled out of their apartments into the busy Saturday streets with 10, 15, 20 people of all different demographics, ethnicities, class backgrounds, not a repeated skin color on either one of them, lined up behind their owners like a military column, chained and shackled. A friend of mine from the neighborhood kicked through a window of a car at a red light with huge steel-toed boots and unlocked the door, and then, after pulling open the creaking yellow passenger door panel, he dragged out a fine-looking young man in exercise clothes, presumably driving to the gym, and he slapped a pair of handcuffs on him, at which point he, my friend, began to dash toward the back of his own personal collection line, towing his latest capture. He seemed shocked to react in any defensive sort of way. In about a minute, he's attached to the last person in line, another gloried member of another remarkable line of residents. I saw him, my friend, short and stocky with a kind of geometric cinder block of adipose for a stomach, fat but taut. His former construction worker's hands medium blistered, and he noticed me, and we both shared a wave and a wink, gulped with self-satisfaction. I was so proud to live in a time when this was allowed, when this was considered, in the eyes of the government, according to a bill passed with almost uniform concurrence in 2018, a noble pursuit, arguing that in order to preserve our status as both individually and autonomously free in a democratic system of pursuit of ends, as well as part of a large community, a communal species whose status is now in large part thanks to an evolutionary history of sticking together, it is now hereby considered moral and righteous to possess another without written or verbal consent, because sometimes we conclude we do not know what's best for us. Sometimes I went out walking just to hear the sound of this metal belt buckle scrapping along the pavement behind me, just to be heard. The line of people dragging behind me on their stomachs, their belts scraping and scratching and clinging against the sidewalk. Possession is fine, it's okay, it buttresses a poorly chosen life. Disabuse me from this notion. I encourage the admirable effort, but don't expect much. Look at my hand. Every finger had 2 rings at least. My hand weighed almost 5 pounds more than the average due to all the stone, jewel, and diamond. I've knocked out all my teeth by myself with a small iron hammer with nail head marks in the face and had them replaced, not by myself, but by a professional and revolutionary dentist with delicate opal stones similar to marble with broken chips from the tombstone embedded therein, which I had broken off myself one night 5 years ago when I was in my grave robbing phase, which then naturally progressed into my tombstone robbing phase, which I found in retrospect slightly more ethical. So I walk with the dead. They're on me and in me. I taste them. Everything I did was defiance to the face of death. Everything was a safeguard. The stones in my mouth resembled teeth, but they were perfected, so immaculate I found myself having to refrain from smiling due to the apparent immediate headaches from others in which making direct eye contact with my front 2 teeth could result. I was at root a humanitarian, misunderstood humanitarian. When I saw a child on the street looking lonely, I grabbed him or her, usually by the throat because that was the most successful approach. It quieted them, one, wrangled them in a very difficult to escape sort of way, as well as put a clinch on their oxygen, thus transferring their first concern to fighting for breath rather than escaping, and jogged as briskly as I could to the back of my line of people, possessions, and chained this little boy or girl to the end of that line, at which point I would muff the little child's hair and explain to her in a tone I spent years perfecting to make sure it falls somewhere between aggro and caring. You're part of a community now. You and me walk together. We take similar steps. We think similar thoughts. But you're mine. I'm going to take care of you. When I explained this was when I noticed how illuminative my teeth were, like 2 sets of solar eclipses when my mouth opens, which made me a little concerned, worried, and embarrassed about my teeth, which then made me a little angry at this little shit who was making me worried, concerned, embarrassed, and angry, and this happens too often. But I make sure I avoid the vituperative feelings and mosey on back to the front of the line in a leaderly position where I prove I belong. There are no more nerves in my mouth. I feel nothing in there, but why should I, and who needs to? What I felt was so much more transpersonal and powerful than being able to feel hot or cold temperatures in my teeth, being able to assess the texture of egg salad sandwich. All these things are mine, in my possession. From the Latinate possidere, meaning to hold, occupy, or reside in, the first being the legal or personal usage, arising in the 14th century, and later followed in the similar but more metaphysical understanding of demonism, a demonic possession. Possession came first, before to possess, a century before the verbal form, meaning to me that the act of having possessions, of being in possession of a plethora of some things, was considered so common and organic to being human that it have a verb specifying the act of tautology of sorts. Like, of course you can possess this thing, but why make a fuss of it? Of course you have more than you know what to do with, so what? Because we are simply a complex human beings, most of whose lives are spent adrift in a ground of heavy, abstract wandering and trying to come down therefrom. Is it any wonder we take solace? That we take so much more than mere solace in objects, and turning things that maybe aren't exactly objects into materials, and maintaining in a lost, godlike, and halfway altruistic ownership over those possessions, assuming as we do that the owners know what's best for these sad sack little creatures and things in need of possession. Because there's the truth. Some are in need of possession, and some need to possess, and the two can share a little bit of each personality, which is to say the owner gets to feel a little bit like he or she is owned by the possessions, and the possessions get to enjoy slight feelings of empowerment over subsequent acquisitions. And on the whole, there's a division between the two. Telling them anything better than all that, than owning, that implied ownership in numbers so staggering that they make heads spin, and that having at one's disposal so much stuff to which just to have to know you're never going to get to know in any significant, intimate level of cognition, but crave nevertheless. Try and tell me that. I won't believe you. But try to tell me that while mustering up any supportable underlying thesis for such an irrational belief. I have 800 friends right now, and they are all attached to me, chained and tied and roped and threaded to my waist, around which I have tied a thick braided cord with horse-like hair frame standing out statically. Than that, tell me there's anything better than that, than 800 friends attached to you. And when I turn around and glance at my possessions, my friends and people and lovers, my people dolls and statue peoples, trophies really, but trophies is such an uncommonly demeaning word for which I have no patience, I shake giddily at the visual treat of such a long line of people belonging to me. A linear train of heads and bodies and coifs, so far-reaching and deep people, those whom I don't know, who don't belong to me, and who are, I would presume, hurrying somewhere on the sidewalk in the middle of which I always choose, like royalty, to walk, have to step quickly on either side of me from as far back as 10 city blocks, passing by each and every face whom, I'm told, returns these passerbys' glances with prisonerish solemnity, but I don't believe it for a second. They cast back, I'm in firm belief, contented and proud countenances, happy to be wanted and obliged to be part of something bigger than themselves, which is what everybody wants, correct me if I'm wrong. Between the ages 10 to 22, the word used most to describe me by my peers was fag. Since then, the descriptions I've found, dramatically less playful and a hell of a lot more grave and unfair. This isn't so rare, though, my having a couple of hundred shy of 1,000 friends. With time, I say, with time I'll hit that benchmark of 1,000. Not rare at all when people pass whom I'm dragging myself and all this literal, chosen and wonderful and wonderfully chosen baggage have tied or chained by devices of their own design and choosing 100 people over a couple hundred people. And then there's the Buddhist of the bunch, who parades her or himself around with the loneliest number of one person attached to their waist, both of them inflated and engorged with pomp and self-importance. Yeah, that's great, I snapped in passing, but what about them? What about that person? What if they want someone attached to them too? Leaning my head in closer so they can hopefully see the reflections cast milky white and glossy on the front of my teeth, which I make sure 3 of my friends and workers brush, wash, scrub, and shine every morning, I add, you think you're being divine or benevolent or unselfish or something lofty, but in reality, you are depriving someone else of that which they need based on some normative set of morals dreamt up in that big, useless fucking head of yours. In addition to my 816 and a half due to an issue with a big rig and its big rubber tires, my 472 employees are affixed somewhere back there, each one chain gang to the other. 1 legitimate daughter and 2 illegitimate sons are back there also. Is it hard to walk with all this? Sure. At times, but mostly not at all. Not with the added steroidal boost of strength and knowing how deep and how far my having goes. It was much more difficult to walk before this became allowed, much more stressful and straining to walk when I had to do so alone, without the added benefit of 800 and 900 people attached to me. But all I had to boost my own confidence was myself. Being alone was so much worse. The more one has, the more one is capable of handling so much having. Tell you honestly believe there's any one emotion in the world better than the engulfing euphoria that comes by way of possessing something. And better yet, try to tell me that little thing you consider better than possession doesn't contain at its heart its original spring from which all other emotions swim and shit out and bat their fucking wings, the act of consuming something, owning something, having something. And for the record, all these somethings can just as easily be replaced with someone's. I love to have and am defined by having. Those clauses lack objects but purposely because they, the objects, are irrelevant most of the time. The verb is what matters, is what's crucial. Even in charitable efforts, you possess, in a way, a knowledge or a debt or understanding or a superiority or a seraphic level of selfhood. You gain something that has nothing to do with money or helping. You gain some kind of interior empire. Sex is possession. Love is possession. Democracy is possession. Theocracy is possession. Religion, most of all, is outright torturous possession. God, if one believes in such a concept, is the total possessor. And if then we are crafted in the image of this God concept and we are all, follow the shifty logic, total possessors drawn down to size, meant and intended to possess as much as possible, grow as big and inflated and bloated by ownership as possible before we die. I'd like, before I go any further, to draw some great distinctions between material possessions and spiritual possessions will be alchemical processes by which the former leads quite naturally, if you let it right to the latter. And you can attempt to take the high altitude, trouble-bearing road where you say that all this is wrong, having all these people and all this material stuff is categorically iniquitous. This is America, and to state that blazingly obvious you are, your identity is composed entirely of what you own, what you have, and what you want, what you dream of owning, having, appropriating sometime in the very near future. Once a day, someone attached to me almost died. Down, person, fallen, someone would shout, calling much needed and rightful awareness to the issue. You probably don't quite understand the difficult burden of being responsible for and having well over 800 or 900 people, but the issue is, let me say right here, tumultuously strenuous. These were the saddest of days, and I paused. When someone almost dies or when someone did die, we paused by endless line of eye for at least a minute to acknowledge this passing, which, because of the way things work, not happy, how long it took, generally, to be notified of anything news-breaking or worrisome within my line of people or possessions, sometimes several a day. But we rest assured we got to the issue with as much promptness as possible. All remedies to quicken the passage of information proved fruitless. Bodies were never released, we kept everything. Possess meant forever, meant never letting go of anything, no matter what, meant acknowledging that the child is side of us all and our unwillingness to part with it. We have a choice. That which we love and adore. If what we adore is ourselves and our self-possession, well then there's a lot to hold on to. We mourn, of course, all 800 and 799 of us. Offered words of console and tenderness and commented on what a great person, man or woman we thought or remembered or thought we remembered or we remembered we thought this person was. But whatever the case was, a gem of a human being. And while we were disconsoled to see him or her go, we would be proud and ecstatic to carry along his or her memory along with his or her corpse, since I never ever let go of anything, lest anyone think I possessed less than I claimed I did. Behind me there was the sound of dragging bodies, face and sternum first on the ground. Together we marched towards an ideology all our own, onism, not to be confused with onanism. I found out today that someone, a large, rather unfortunately great number of someone, had died. A string of 10 or 15 of my friends, my people, my followers, my belongings, my possessions, my lovely little relics from which and from whom I derived so much pleasure and so much wonder, had died. These are the first few, a large few, I know, to die on me in a massive number. It was the start of a difficult era. I know the argument against possessions, the argument against its hopelessness. One day I'm going to die and I'm going to leave all these possessions behind. My houses, my clothes, my friends, my belongings, everything I own or have taken and am dragging along behind me. I know this. I don't expect to carry them anywhere post-death. I don't expect reward or punishment, and I realize life is not a game of who can acquire the most, but it is a game of who can feel the best, who can fill themselves up with enough fodder, enough stuff, enough substance, however temporary that substance might be, so as to perpetuate the feeling of total value, of total desirability, total worthiness, total bliss, this continuation of bliss, of high plateau, peak high emotion. And if I can't keep that level up, if I can't keep that heightened sense of self-worth and self-value, it'll plummet. It will drop stories and stories down to the ground the way an elevator on the top floor of a 200-story building whose cables have smacked and is full of precious, valuable, pregnant life drops to the ground like a cannonball. And every single important life in that elevator will die. A flurried spray of misty pinkish red. I would lose meaning, I would lose value. I only know myself through other people. I own them, I keep them, to continue helping me know me. And if I lose it, if I suddenly give up all this stuff, all this life I acquire, I will lose myself. Nothing is about an afterlife. Everything is about right now, trying not to break down. I'll do whatever I can to not break down. If that means taking someone by the neck and chaining them to me and dragging them around from place to place, store to store, city to city, feeding and smacking them, telling you to cheer up, to be happy like me, to be warm, to be open to new experiences, to stop bringing everyone down, then so be it. If I don't like myself, I'm going to make you make me like myself. You're going to show me what's worthwhile about me, or we're all going to die together, chained together like this, pathetic and beautiful and full of so much sorrow. Every morning I wake up, I'm joined by the sound of 900 other people breathing, all stacked on top of one another, and by outside my window, the sound of dragging neighbors out for crepes or bagels or coffee with a friend, both of them lugging and hauling their ever-growing line of possessions. And I don't ever want to lose that. I was so afraid of losing that. The most terrifying thing of all for me right then was that I was going to have to show my face at the conference, for which I was already late and getting later by the second, with a string of unaccounted for desks, which we were all supposed to mark down on our RSVP slip, and which was supposed to represent your status qua an elite owner of bodies and lofty possessions. Now I was going to have to hurry there with 10 or 15, 16, 17, 18. I kept finding more dead possessions. I shook them, their chains rattling. Get up, I screamed. On your feet. A pale middle-aged man beside one of the dead ones never took his eyes off me as I grabbed one body and then the next, vigorously throttling them. This is going to be a lot of mourning, he mumbled. Not now, I told him. His head rose with glacial slowness. No mourning? I stuffed my wrist in front of his face and asked him what time it was. What time did we have to be there and where, and then understanding of things, was there going to be enough time for anything funereal? He looked from one watch to the next, 8 in all on my arm, all of which I had taken from members of my line. I think that one's mine, the man said, smiling to himself. He touched the glass faceplate, honestly thrilled with himself at finding his own watch. There was no time to mourn them, not right now. Cleanliness might be adjacent to the divine, but possession was, in and of itself, godliness, and nobody, not 15, or according to my latest counting, now 20 mysterious, and from what my best guess told me was a fairly violent death, meant they were in all likelihood fighting amongst themselves, which would thus devalue my possessions in front of the entire polypersonal panel of esteemed judges. Not that any of that was going to prevent me from attaining such stature. So I began to look around frantically, like a man reduced to his last monoidic substratum, for as many people as I could grab, dashing off into the street and grabbing a woman with a child strapped to her chest in one of those baby carriages that look simultaneously like a plastic explosive strapped to her chest. And I grabbed her by the hair and also the boy affixed to her bosom, We all fell to the ground, scraping our knees on pavement. People rushed in to help, and I grabbed at them. I grabbed at everyone. There was a wealth of grabbing going on, and the click-clacking of handcuffs and medieval types of chains and bondage could be heard from all over. And there seemed to my very eyes, as people rushed in, to be a veritable melee in the streets of white, brown, black, beige men and women converging right there in the middle of the street, cars honking and drivers shrieking out for us to move, but there was no possible way that was happening. I had emergency plastic handcuffs in my pocket that I was using to attach the woman and her son to the end of my line, to a ragamuffin old man with an eye that didn't open, who I would forever contest looked like a prideful seafarer, happy to be on board. And when I affixed this young woman to his hand, the ascension of the old man's puissance and vitality soared. He did not say it, but I could hear the words "thank you" coming from his mouth.